welcome to the deep dive. The sources we're looking at today are, well, they're pulling us into a truly high-stakes conversation.
They really are.
It's one that tries to link ancient history, spiritual prophecy, and some of the most dramatic cultural shifts of the last decade.
It's a huge claim.
It is. So our mission is direct.
Mm-hmm.
We're diving deep into this startling narrative that posits that recent global events, they aren't random at all. They're actually tangible evidence of ancient spiritual forces being intentionally unleashed.
That's right. And we have to be clear, you're navigating a very specific and I'd say deeply controversial interpretation of history here. The whole thesis of these texts, it revolves around a single architectural event that happened back in 2015.
A replication of the Ark of Triumph.
From ancient Palmyra, yes.
And the sources don't mince words about what this arch supposedly represents. They frame it not as, cultural preservation, but as something far more sinister.
Oh, absolutely. The documents we have describe this whole exercise as a Luciferian ploy with a very specific goal to create what they keep calling stargates or portals. And the purpose, they argue, was to channel or release two specific ancient spirits into the modern Western world.
The spirit of Baal and the spirit of Jezi-Bel.
Exactly.
Okay, before we go any further, let's nail down how these sources define Baal, because it really sets the tone for everything else.
It does. It's crucial. Baal is explicitly identified in this material as the god of sexual perversion and the god of child sacrifice.
So the thesis is that modern society is now experiencing the fallout from these specific ancient attributes being released on a mass scale.
That's the core of it, yes. An extraordinary claim.
It's an extraordinary claim that a spiritual invasion could be launched with a piece of architecture. So let's unpack the starting point. Palmyra. What made this site so spiritually significant that its replica could be seen as a portal?
Well, Palmyra, it's often called the Pearl of the Desert, and it holds just immense historical weight.
It was a major trading hub, right?
A huge trading center on the Silk Road, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And crucially, its temple complex was dedicated to Baal. It housed the massive Temple of Baal and the famous Arch of Triumph.
And the history of the replica itself is quite telling, according to these sources.
Yeah.
It wasn't the original gateway they wanted to replicate, was it?
No, and that's a key detail. The initial plan was much more direct. They intended to replicate the actual gateway to the Temple of Baal itself.
The main entrance?
The main entrance. But the sources claim this plan was met with a significant coordinated backlash, a genuine coordinated objection from both secular groups and, various religious communities.
So they switched it out. They substituted the Arch of Triumph instead. But the source material insists this substitution made no difference to the spiritual outcome. Why?
Because, in their view, the entire site was consecrated to Baal. So even if they used the Arch of Triumph, which was part of the processional route leading to the temple, the sources argue it still functioned symbolically as a gateway.
A stargate.
A stargate, yes. It was a compromise that let the larger spiritual agenda proceed, just under the guise of cultural preservation.
And what about the physical mechanics? I mean, who were the powerful entities backing this?
The documents point to the Institute of Digital Archaeology as the lead organization. And this is a major collaboration. You have heavyweights like Harvard University, the University of Oxford, and Dubai's Museum of the Future all involved.
So this isn't some fringe project?
Not at all. The arch itself was a technological feat built using a high-fidelity 3D printed model. It gives it this modern, almost futuristic feel, despite its ancient roots.
And this is where the conspiracy, for lack of a better word, really deepens. It moves beyond the object itself to its placement. The sources draw connections between Trafalgar Square, where it was first displayed, and other global power centers. What are these alleged alignments?
This is one of the most technical and specific claims in the whole source stack. They assert that the placement of the replica in Trafalgar Square, specifically aligned with the Column of Nelson, mimics the exact geometric layout you find in both the Washington Masonic Mall and the Vatican.
Wait, all three?
Yeah.
The Vatican, Trafalgar Square, and the D.C. Mall?
All three. The sources label them Luciferian world capitals of power and control, suggesting the alignment isn't accidental, but a deliberate spiritual and architectural synchronization.
What's the core principle that supposedly unites them? What's the connection?
It's geometry, specifically the phi ratio, the golden ratio. They claim the original Temple of Baal was mathematically precise, it adhered to this ratio, and it was laid out in what they call a Masonic floor pattern, with the entrance always facing due west.
And they see that in BC.
They look at the D.C. Mall, they see the obelisk, the Washington Monument, and they then label it very pointedly as the shaft of Baal.
A phallic symbol.
A universally recognized phallic symbol associated with ancient Baal worship. So for them, this architectural link confirms the global intent behind the portal.
That is a remarkable synthesis of esoteric architecture and a spiritual warfare narrative. Let's pivot now to the specific spirit they claim was released, Baal. The connection they draw between ancient practice and modern culture is just incredibly stark.
It is. The text grounds its argument in Scripture, specifically citing Jeremiah 19.4-5. It talks about building high places of Baal and burning sons in the fire as burnt offerings. The sources then move to define what that act really represented in practice.
And what was the practical, cynical motive, according to these sources?
They detail that the sacrifice of infants to Baal, literally passing them through fire, was, ironically, a form of contraception.
A form of population control.
Exactly. The motive, they claim, was pure self-interest. Rearing a child was just deemed too inconvenient and costly, and it would hinder the parent's ability to pursue lustful pleasures of the flesh.
And that interpretation leads directly to the source material's most inflammatory claim, the modern-day equivalent of that sacrifice.
Exactly. The source material draws a perfectly straight line from that ancient sacrifice to modern-day abortions. They explicitly label abortion as satanic child sacrifice, and they specifically link it to organizations like Planned Parenthood. They argue the driving force eliminating the inconvenient innocent to preserve personal pleasure is identical across millennia.
That is an intense indictment. Moving beyond the sacrifice itself, the sources list other dark rituals they claim are still maintained by groups they label religious covens and Luciferians.
Right. The sources claim that these secretive practices include things like sexually perverted rituals, cannibalism, and the ritualistic drinking of blood, which they call vampirism. It suggests a continued secretive spiritual presence.
And to wrap up this Baal section, there's a claimed synchronization with a specific calendar date that aligns this spiritual force with, of all things, modern political movements.
Yes, the Feast of the Beast. It's Baal's traditional worship feast, also known as Beltane, celebrated on May 1st.
May Day.
May Day. And this date falls precisely halfway between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. Intriguingly, the sources point out that this exact date, May 1st, is also celebrated by communists and Soviet socialists.
And they see that as evidence of a link.
They claim it's evidence that these political groups also, in some way, venerate Luciferianism.
Okay, so if Baal represents perversion and sacrifice, we now need to look at his spiritual consort, Jezi-Bel, who the sources claim brought the resulting chaos and cultural degradation.
Right. Jezi-Bel is introduced as the Queen of Heaven in this context, and she's equated not just with Baal's wife, but also with ancient goddesses like Isis and Gaia representing Mother Nature or Mother Earth. Her key companion, the sources note, is the owl, or Molech.
And the owl symbolism ties directly into contemporary American elite culture, according to this material.
It connects directly to the Bohemian Grove in Sonoma County, California. The text states that the Owl of Molech is a central figure there, specifically during the cremation of care ritual.
Which the sources frame as what?
They frame that ritual as a modern symbolic act, one that eulogizes the slaughter of the innocent, the exact pattern seen in the fire of Baal.
So the spiritual gateways opened in 2015 via the Arch. The spirits are released. What specific, measurable cultural shifts do the sources claim were the direct result of this influence?
The sources pin the blame for a rapid succession of societal shifts directly on these Baal and Jezi-Bel spirits, stating they accelerated immediately after 2015.
Okay, what's on the list?
They list the explosion of the gay agenda, the legalization of same-sex marriages across the USA, which they assert was enacted unlawfully without a referendum or vote.
I see.
Then the subsequent lighting of the White House in LGBT colors, and the rapid growth of the transsexual and transvestite movement, including phenomena like drag queen story hours in public libraries, and even, controversially, in some churches.
That's a massive societal upheaval to assign to one spiritual cause. I find the sources' claims about the reaction to dissent particularly revealing about their worldview.
And that's a crucial part of their narrative, the alleged criminalization of dissent. The sources claim that when parents protested these developments at schools or libraries, they were arrested and investigated by organizations like Homeland Security and the FBI.
And labeled.
Often being labeled as domestic terrorists.
And the legislative environment is also highlighted as a direct spiritual attack on the family.
Yes. They use California as a prime example, citing laws where children can legally be taken from their parents if the parent objects to a minor identifying with a different gender.
Wow.
The sources view this as the Jezi-Bel spirit actively separating children from parental guidance to maintain control.
So it seems the entire framework of the sources is built around this idea of a spiritual inversion, where the world is tricked into labeling evil as good.
Precisely. They argue that the acts they define as perversion and the murder of the aborted innocent are deliberately obscured by the secular world using euphemisms.
Like what?
Instead of identifying the sin, society uses terms like alternative lifestyles, life choices, pro-choice, and progressive emancipation. This renaming, the sources claim, is key to masking the true satanic nature of these behaviors.
This brings us to the broader prophetic context. The current situation, according to them, is not new. It's a playback of a specific biblical era.
They connect it immediately to the days of Elijah in ancient Israel.
Under King Ahab and Queen Jezi-Bel.
Right. And that era was defined by a severe spiritual drought and a nation that was, lukewarm, waffling between worshiping Jehovah and worshiping Baal. The sources suggest the last days will feature this exact same condition, but globally.
And what about the region of Palmyra itself? Does it connect to the coming Antichrist figure?
The location is highly significant in their prophecy. The sources trace the lineage of that area back to historical figures like Seleucus Cytonicator and especially Antiochus V Epiphanes.
Antiochus means God manifest.
God manifest, and he is referenced as a major type of the coming Antichrist, who in this interpretation is prophesied to be Assyrian.
Okay, now we have to address what is probably the most politically charged claim in this entire stack of documents, the destruction of the original Palmyra complex by ISIS in 2015. And we have to stress, the source material makes an incredibly bold and controversial accusation here.
They do.
They allege that these terrorist actions were not organic, but engineered. What exactly do they claim?
The text asserts, without qualification, that the actions of ISIS, including the genocide of Christians and the destruction of the temple complex, were created and funded by the CIA and Mossad and others. They frame these terrorist organizations as proxy armies, serving a higher hidden agenda.
And they use a highly specific linguistic piece of information to support the claim about Mossad. What is that?
This is truly specific. The sources explicitly note that the Hebrew acronym for Mossad in one rendering stands for the Israel Security Intelligence Service, or ISIS.
ISIS.
Yes. And the text alleges this is even admitted by the U.S. Pentagon, claiming that ISIS and similar groups are ultimately proxy armies of the globalist Luciferian and Synagogue of Satan.
Used to achieve specific ends, like destabilization.
Precisely.
And returning one last time to the physical location of those arch replicas, London and New York. Why were those two specific global cities chosen as the launch points for these alleged portals?
Well, the final layer of the source's argument is entirely esoteric. They claim London and New York were chosen because they are strategically positioned on sacred ley lines of Earth's energy grid.
The ley lines.
Yes. This precise esoteric placement, they argue, was essential to facilitate the traversing of dimensions necessary to activate the gateways and effectively unleash those ancient spirits into our modern world.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered architecture, prophecy, deities, and global conspiracies, all linked by this one event in 2015. What is the grand synthesis the source material leaves us with?
I think the core takeaway is that this material rejects the idea of random cultural evolution. Instead, it views these shifts, abortion, perversion, the breakdown of gender roles, as the tangible, deliberate results of a spiritual war.
A war that was formally initiated by these symbolic gateways.
Yes, gateways that represent a profound act of defiance against the divine.
It sets up a stark choice then. A spiritual dilemma posed to the modern religious community, much like the one faced by ancient Israel in Elijah's day.
The source material really challenges the modern, often lukewarm church with this existential question. Who is truly the head of the church today? Is it Jesus? Or is it the pervasive influence of Jezi-Bel, driving compromise and cultural capitulation?
That's a powerful final indictment. And that leads us to the provocative thought that the source material leaves you with, something for you to mull over on your own.
The source material attributes the widespread inability of the modern world, and even the church, to definitively choose a side to stop waffling in between two opinions, to the terrifying power of the coming Antichrist and false prophet.
And how will they do that?
They specifically state that these final figures will have the power to call down literal fire from heaven, a shocking spectacle designed to confuse and paralyze belief, making a clear spiritual choice impossible for many during that final period.